When applying for jobs, cover letters are some of the most important documents you'll write, even as important as your CV or resume. The reason is that a good cover letter will ensure that interviewers who are screening applicants will be interested enough to look at your other documents, whereas a bad or even an average cover letter decreases the chance that they'll look at your other documents anyway. So no matter how polished your CV or resume, no matter how impressive the documents you include in your application, if they don't make it past the cover letter, those don't matter. So in this video, we want to talk about some tips and pointers for writing cover letters in academic and industrial job applications. While our focus is going to be primarily on academic job applications, the advice in this video is going to apply equally to academia and industry concerns. First thing to talk about briefly is three different kinds of cover letters that all have certain specific tidbits about them. Letters of application generally are what we generally think of as a cover letter. This would be when you have a job in mind that you're actually responding to, and the cover letter generally consists of announcing your intent to apply, describing your fit with the position, and then describing the materials that accompany the letter. There's also electronic cover letters. In this day and age of computer-based applications, a lot of people will actually request that your cover letter be cut and pasted into an email. And the important thing to know about that kind of cover letter is that it's really supposed to be a bit shorter than a regular cover letter. A regular cover letter may be 2 pages, whereas if you're asked to actually cut and paste your cover letter into an email, you want to make sure that it's a bit more concise, maybe 3 or 4 paragraphs. Another thing to be particularly concerned about with electronic cover letters are you want to really carefully prepare your subject line. You want to make sure the subject line is accurate. You want to make sure that it's informative. So it might read something like statement of interest or application for X position or for X advertised position. And of course you want to stay polite and respectful. Just because it's in an email doesn't mean that it should be less formal. It should be about as formal as you would write in a regular print cover letter. There's also letters of inquiry, which are a little bit different than a cover letter for a job that you're applying to, because letters of inquiry may be to inquire if there is a position available. So if you're looking at a position at a particular university or college and you don't see any advertised positions, you might write a cover letter that asks if there are any openings and then goes on to tell them a bit about yourself so that if there are openings, they could tell you what they are, and then you could apply for a position in the future. The next thing to talk about is the rough sequence of what should be brought into a cover letter and how to order your cover letter. Although, as you can see from the slide, it's fairly movable. So you can design your cover letter the way you think best fits the circumstance, but this is kind of a rough suggestion of how you might order the cover letter. Paragraph 1, though, is usually pretty standard across cover letters, and it starts with a statement of interest to apply for the position and a very brief biography of who you are as a candidate. So the first sentence may be as simple as, I'm writing in order to apply for X advertised position as advertised in Y source. And you might want to do a sentence or two briefly discussing who you are as a candidate. So if you're an academic, you might want to talk about if you're currently studying in a particular area or you currently hold a PhD in a certain area, you might bring that up. Also, what your research interests are. If you are a student who is writing without a dissertation being done, this would be a good chance to very briefly bring up how close you are to being finished. Or if you're in industry, you might briefly talk about your skill set, how much experience you've had within that industry, etc. But no more than 1 to 2 sentences for that brief biography. It's basically a segue into the rest of your paragraphs. The next paragraph is usually a bit more of an elaboration on who you are and now particularly your fit with that particular position. So in any given position, you'll notice they have a certain list of things that they expect all applicants to have or experiences they expect applicants to bring with them or a skill set, etc. So in this paragraph, you want to talk not only more about who you are, but whether you have those qualifications. So if they're looking for someone with particular fluency in a certain technology, paragraph 2 is probably where you're going to mention that you have that fluency, what fluencies you have with what technologies. Or if they're looking for someone who is a skilled teacher or researcher, you might bring in in this paragraph more information about your teaching or research experience that makes you qualified for that particular job. But this paragraph is basically answering the question, how do you fit with this particular position, and why should we look at you for this position? The next paragraph would be something more personal about why you're applying to that particular company or that particular institution rather than that particular job description. So especially in academia, if you're applying for something that, let's say, is out of state, you might want to say something about why that particular institution is appealing to you. Or if you're in industry, you might want to address not only why that industry or why that particular job description, but why is that company or why is that organization particularly attractive to you, and why should they, find you in turn particularly attractive. So if you are in academics, you might talk about why a particular institution is one that you're interested in, whether it be their reputation for a certain type of scholarship that resonates with the work you do, or if it's their mission statement about what kind of teaching goes on at that institution. If that resonates with you, this would be a good time to bring that up. Or if it's a company or organization in a particular industry, you might talk about if you have a particular admiration for the products or services that they offer or the type of research they do in the field, you might bring that up. Your final paragraph, of course, is where you're going to wrap things up. Here's where you're going to do things like restate your interest in the position, let them know what other documents are attached to the cover letter, and then invite them to contact you with future questions or requests for additional documents, and give them an indication of how they might contact you for that. So your first sentence could read something as simple as, in conclusion, I'd love to be considered for X position, or I'm looking forward to being considered for at that particular position. And then the next sentence may even read something like, attached to this cover letter are the following documents, and then you would list the documents included in the application. One of the reasons you want to do that is so that you can let them know that these other documents are supposed to be in with the application packet. It may be that one of the documents failed to attach to your electronic application or something like that, and if you list the documents you've attached, they'll know that you're actually missing a document rather than that you just forgot to do the document or didn't do the document at all. Last, you might want to make sure they know that if they have further questions or they would like additional information, they can contact you, and then give them an indication of what medium you'd like them to contact you with, either by email or phone. Here's some more general advice to think about when you're writing your cover letter, both before you write it and while you're writing it. First of all, it's important to start off on a good foot, and that usually requires addressing your cover letter to a particular person. In academia, that might be the head of the search committee in the department. Sometimes that information will be listed in the job description, and other times you'll have to call the department to find out, or HR to find out who the search committee chair is. I highly recommend that you do that, even if it takes a few minutes of your time. If you address it just to the search committee when you could have found out the name of the chair, that might look like you didn't put forth the effort. Also in industry, there's going to be someone who's probably in charge of collecting the application materials from various candidates. You'll want to find out who that is, if there is such a person, and address it that way. As long as you're addressing your cover letter to a particular person, you should use the salutation, "Dear so-and-so." If you have to address it to a group of people or a search committee, you'll probably want to start with "Attention Search Committee" or "Attention Human Resources." Also, in terms of length, the typical length for a cover letter is 1 to 2 pages, 4, maybe 5 paragraphs at the outset. If your cover letter is more than 2 pages, you'll want to think about either trying to trim it down, or if you can't trim it down without sacrificing some of the information you think is most important, then keep it whatever length you have it. But I would definitely advise that you don't go over 2.5 pages at the maximum. Industrial cover letters are typically a little bit shorter than academic cover letters, so 1 to 2 pages closer to 1 page. Academic cover letters are usually 1 to 2 pages closer to 2 pages. I've highlighted this third one because it's very important to do your research before you start writing. You want to be familiar not only with the job description, But as much as you can, be familiar with the company or organization that you would be working for, because your cover letter needs to speak about your fit with the position and with the organization. So you don't want to sound like you don't know as much about the organization or you don't know as much about the position. If they require 4 or 5 different skill sets from their employees, you want to make sure that you can speak to that in a cover letter. And if the organization or institution is known for a particular thing or does business a certain way, you want to make sure that you kind of hint to them that you know about the organization in your cover letter. That'll increase your chances of getting a call back. Also, when you're writing a cover letter, keep in mind that it really is about highlighting you as a person and how you fit with that organization. So you can certainly talk about the skill sets you have, but make sure that you do so in a way that's tailored to the job description and that organization. You may even want to use some of the language that's used in the job description when speaking about yourself and your fit with the company and the position, because that makes it sound like you've done your research and it makes it sound like you fit a lot better with that organization and position if you use the particular language that the job description uses. Also, provide examples whenever it's relevant. If you have a particular skill set with a particular software that they require, or let's say that they're looking for engaging faculty and you have experience teaching the population that they require, you probably want to bring in 1 or 2 of those specific examples. People remember examples more. They're likely to remember your cover letter if you provide 1 or 2 illustrations of how you actually fit, rather than just describing generally how you fit with a position. Some people think about whether or not they should start with a form letter or whether or not they should write all of their cover letters for each position from scratch. And I would usually recommend something of a hybrid between these 2 approaches. You might start off with a generic cover letter that you write just for a general position, which would include maybe your first paragraph, which won't vary that much between cover letters depending on the position, or certain sentences that wouldn't vary much. Let's say your final paragraph where you close and sum up and talk about the documents in the dossier. Those won't vary very much from position to position, so it's not really worth your time to write those from scratch. But the majority of your cover letter really should be personalized towards that organization and that job description. So I would recommend, as the pie chart indicates, that really 80% of your cover letter should be personalized to that institution that you rewrite from cover letter to cover letter. And then 20% maybe is sentences taken from your form letter that you've written as a generic cover letter. So lastly, there are some stylistic concerns that are important to note. First of all, of course, it goes without saying, proofread, proofread, proofread. And you want to make sure that not only you are proofreading your document, but since you're the one who wrote the document, you may be the one least likely to catch errors in the document because you're so close to the content. You might want to give it to others, whether you have friends, a spouse, a colleague, who could read your cover letter, if only to make sure that the spelling and grammar is appropriate, but also even to give some stylistic advice. Lastly, make sure to use the traditional business format. So we're talking about block styles, justified margins, short paragraphs, and properly formatted upper lines. So making sure that your name and address lines are formatted properly to business specifications, that you're using a block style of paragraphs so there's no indent on the paragraphs and there's a space between paragraphs. You want to make sure the margins are justified both to the left and the right, which is typical business format. You also want to make sure your paragraphs aren't overly long. So you don't want to have half-page paragraphs if you don't have to. It interferes with the readability a bit. And if you have a paragraph that's more than 6 or 7 lines, you really should consider breaking that up into smaller paragraphs. It just makes the appearance flow better and it makes the document look better. After it's done, you really want to make sure that if you are sending in a print quality document, you invest the money and time to print on nice quality print paper. So not just the standard paper that you might print out regular documents for your daily use on, but make sure you get a paper quality that makes you come off as professional as you can be, because it's little things like that that really do help people get a positive impression of you. Also, make sure to follow the directions very carefully about where to send your cover letter, whether to send it as an email or whether to send it as an attachment. Even things like if they want you to send the document as a PDF file, make sure to send it as a PDF file rather than a Word document file or an open document file. Make sure that you send it to the appropriate place and the appropriate person, and of course make sure that all of your other documentation is also in the appropriate format. Sometimes they want you to merge all of your documents together into one master document that you attach. Other times they want you to attach documents separately. Whatever the instructions, make sure that you follow those instructions. So to conclude, we'll start where we began, which is that writing a cover letter really is one of the most important things you can do in your job application process. A good cover letter can pay off because it leads interviewers to go on to the other documents and read your other documents. But if you have a poor cover letter, or even sometimes an average cover letter, depending on how many other applicants there are, your other documents may not be read. So it's very important to spend a good amount of time doing each cover letter.